Hundreds of years later, Polybius was saying the same thing, that when the people became accustomed to depend upon others for their livelihood, that it would degenerate the people, weaken the people, so that they would become like perfect savages. They would no longer have that camaraderie of their society. He probably knew this because he was from Corinth, and Corinth had a similar system, and power was centralized, and eventually that power betrayed Rome several times. As a matter of fact, that's why Polybius was in Rome, is because he was actually captured, held hostage, because the first time the Corinthians betrayed the Romans, they took a bunch of hostages and said, you better not do this again. Well, they did it again because they had these leaders who exercised authority. And they had these leaders that exercised authority because they had been moving towards socialism too. Well, Rome absolutely destroyed Corinth, razed it to the ground, so that nobody was living there until about 50 years later when Caesar came along and decided to fund Corinth to reestablish it as a city because it was in a pretty strategic location. But the point is, the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was in a time of affluence. They did not strengthen the poor, and they did not strengthen the poor because they set up a system of socialism where everybody had to pay in as members. So there was a guarantee that money was going to come in. You were a minister, you were going to guarantee that this money was going to come in, and then all you had to do is redistribute it. The way originally Israel was set up is that you were supposed to pay in to the minister of your choice, organizing yourselves in the tens, hundreds, and thousands, which was common throughout history. And then once you were organized in that fashion, you were to tithe to your minister. But if he didn't do a good job, you could pick a different minister to tithe to. So you had kind of a governing influence, like the governor on a carburetor. You're controlling the flow of fuel. And if the minister's not doing a good job, you can cut him off. But in these new systems, where men were calling themselves benefactors, but they were forcing the offerings of the people, you couldn't just vote them out. You would have to wait till another election. Your offering was counted as a votive offering, but if you didn't think he was doing a good job, you didn't have to pay in. You didn't have to support him. You had to support somebody if you were going to do according to the will of God. But of course, if you're going to do according to the will of Christ, you're sitting down in the tens, hundreds, and thousands, taking care of the needy of your society through faith, hope, and charity, because Christ commanded that. But if you're not doing that, then you're not doing what Christ said anyway, so it really doesn't make any difference. You see, because you haven't been seeking the kingdom of God, you've been seeking not only the kingdoms of the world, but the benefits of the world that come to you by way of men who exercise authority one over the other. And Christ said that it wasn't to be that way. You are not to be depending upon those men who exercise authority one over the other. And you are. You are, because you're not doing what Christ said to do. If you go look at Matthew 20:25 and Mark 10:42 and Luke 22:25, you see that Jesus is commanding that we're not like the governments of the Gentiles, the other nations, who exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise upon them call themselves benefactors. In other words, they're providing you with benefits at the expense of your neighbor through forced contributions, all legal because everybody is signed up. But you're not to set up your government in that way. Same as if you read Deuteronomy 17, God is telling you what to put in your Constitution, and almost none of those 5 items were put into the Constitution of the United States.